Welcome to this introductory talk about Katazome and a studio tour with John Marshall. My name is Flora from Plants in Colour, and the intention of this session is to introduce you to John and his work in advance of the Katazome programme that's starting next month, to give you a sense of what that will involve and for you to get to know John more. Thank you so much, John, for giving your time for this session, and thank you everyone for making the time to be here. I'm now going to hand you over to John to begin.
So good morning for me, good evening, I know for some of you. It's nice to see so many familiar faces out there. I'm John Marshall. I'm a Katazome dyer. The piece in back of me is an example of some of the work I do, and that's done, the piece in back was done entirely with indigo that I grow in my garden. I don't grow all of the plants that I do, that I use. I grow several, but most of them I will go ahead and purchase commercially and then produce the dyes out of them, because after all, my goal is to produce the textiles.
I'm sorry, John, I accidentally muted you.
There we go. I saw the message come up. When I'm dealing with my dyes, and I'll show you more of my studio and how I do that, I want you to know I don't grow everything that I do, although I grow a great many of my dyes. Also, when I'm talking about the dyes, I'm talking about both plant-based dyes, like the indigo, but also dirt and other types of minerals. So just keep that in mind when you're looking at the colors that I produce. So the goal today is more to give you a notion of what my studio setup looks like, as opposed to necessarily give you a lesson in Katazome, but hopefully it'll tempt you into taking some of the classes that Flora is offering. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to do screen share. Okay, very good. So this gives you a shot of my studio while I'm working. I stretch my fabric out lengthwise. Now, I know in terms of scanning the faces of many of you who are attending today, a great many of you are already familiar with this and have already taken classes. So, of course, much of this will look familiar to you. The fabric is stretched out between posts. And you can see there's a hammock-like setup where my fabric is stretched mid-air, and that's how I do almost all of my work. It's just much more convenient. I live in Round Valley. Round Valley is a little tiny community in the rural mountains of the Mendocino Mountains called the Yola-Boles. It's part of a larger chain of mountains in the West Coast. This part of the United States, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, is very rural. It's one of the least populated areas of the West Coast, and that's nice. We have our particular town only has a population of 1,000. It's quiet. There is no road going through. So if you're not coming here intentionally, we say that you're a long way from sympathy. Okay, so hopefully you're coming here because you'd like to be here. This is a shot of Round Valley. It is, of course, round, which is why it's called that. And this gives you a view from our lookout. And you see the little yellow circle there. From the hill coming into the valley, that's where the little town is located. Now, this is my mill itself as an aerial view. So in 1996, I purchased an old flour mill, Flour, for producing wheat flour. And this gives you, as I say, an aerial shot of it. This is the mill itself. It's since been renovated a bit more than what you're seeing here. It's currently a 14,000 square foot building. And then down below, you can see this little bandstand. That's where the town holds its Blackberry Festival and a few other activities. When I purchased the land, I knew that the town used it for that type of thing, which of course was fine by me. This is a shot of the old flour mill in the 1920s, and you can see the sacks of grains that were being produced. It stopped being used as a flour mill when the highway was built. So when the road into town was actually paved, which made it a 2-hour journey instead of a 2-day journey to get to our town, the Wonder Bread truck started coming in, and that pretty much put the flour mill out of business. There is another shot I have where the Wonder Bread truck is next to one of these wagons, and so sort of a hint of things to come. This is a shot more as it was seen in the 1970s. So it had changed a bit over the years. They had converted it from the flour mill into a co-op and another number of other things just to keep it in use. And this is as it was in after I purchased it and renovated it a bit. So after restoring the front facade, my dad recut the letters for me. And so the 1888 is when the front portion was first built. 1914 is when it was built up in the back and made much sturdier. And 1999 is not the year I purchased it, but it happened to be the year that I was up that high on the scaffolding. I regret not having fudged a little and made it 2000, but I thought that was being a little presumptuous at the time. In hindsight, I know nobody would have cared. But had I done that, it would have been the 1819s and the 20s. But there you are. In working on it, my goal was to keep the mill more or less true to the era in which it was built in the 1880s, but not always technically so. I just wanted the aesthetic to feel that way. Any renovations that were done might not have been my particular taste, but they were appropriate to the building, or at least I thought so. I needed an awning in the front. This is the front door. So of course, UPS deliveries, anybody standing there in the rain gets drenched. But it took me years to figure out what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just put a lean-to awning, which actually would have been the correct thing for the type of architecture, but I wanted it to fit in more. By taking this arch from the top of the building and bringing that down over the door, this is the look I was aiming for. So this is a cardboard cartoon that I've placed up there just to see if indeed that's what I was going to want. And then starting to build the structure out from the cardboard. Eventually I wound up with the bits and pieces here, as you see it underway. And so this was how it started. And this is how it was finished with the front awning. So again, that is totally not period appropriate. They would never have had an awning like that. But I think from a viewpoint of ignorance of people walking by, aesthetically, it was far more pleasing to me. So that's how I'm trying to approach the building. Okay, now keeping in mind that shape, I built a little what would you call it, a little pavilion in the backyard, and I used the leftover arching for that to create the top shade for the pavilion. And then by mimicking that shape at the top, and again, using the leftover wood, I made the benches for sitting in the little pavilion. So this is in the backyard section. Now, as we walk in that front door arch, you can see the entryway here. And so I have some of my dolls and whatnot, the little various tchotchke that were collected in travels. And then to the immediate right is a library where I keep all of my reference books. This statue is of a young Japanese boy named Ninomiya Kinjiro. He, in Japan, nowadays nobody knows about him, but in the old days when I was growing up, he was revered as a scholar. He was a young man raised in poverty, but was determined to better himself through reading, and later became a very important figure in Japanese history. So this is how the mill looked on the inside when I first purchased it. It's a bit dark and dingy. It was filled with old theater seats. It was filled with well, a lot of bat contributions and owl contributions and other types of things. So having cleaned it out, this is more or less what it looked like. And then to go along and add, to bring in light, to add additional structures. Now the circle is showing you a conical shape. What happened is a flour mill, the flour would be ground. This is not a water wheel mill. This was all driven by steam. And so the gears would turn, the wheels would turn, they'd carry the grain up and down through the floors. And the last stage was for the flour to accumulate into this funnel-like section, and that's where the sacks were filled. So we'll come back to that in just a second. So now that it's been cleaned out, painted, electricity added. There was no electricity or plumbing when I purchased the building. I've added a few more supports, and now we're getting into the actual work area. And that yellow circle shows you where that funnel is now that we saw earlier. It hasn't changed position. It's just relative to what you're seeing in the room. Okay, and these are other areas, lots of storage. There's 16-foot ceilings. This is some of the equipment I use in the dyeing. And this back area is a large sink area for washing and preparing stencils. Here again is the cone that we talked about earlier in back of the office setting. And to the right there, you see one of many bathrooms, stairs leading upstairs. This sounds like a real estate agent showing you everything. But the fun part about this scale and the daunting part about the scale of this building is I could pretty much do whatever I wanted in it. But the scale can be overwhelming, because at 14,000 square feet, it's not like a smaller house where you can put a lot of detail and money into each little room to have the perfect type of molding and so forth. Instead, the main thing was to get a wall up. There was no insulation. There were no walls on the inside. Cheryl, who is in the audience today, came and helped me with much of this, so she knows well of just clearing things out. The walls were built of studs, but the studs were lined up on the outside, but since they were hand-hewn timber, on the inside, they were 2 inches thick, 4 inches thick, 5.5 inches thick, whatever they happened to cut the board. So when you're trying to plaster the inside, you can see it would be a bit of a challenge. So then creating bathrooms, there were no bathrooms, of course, there was no plumbing. I would take from different items that I enjoyed, like a Balinese window, and start to riff off that. So making these three-dimensional tile-like pieces of the water nymphs, followed with the sconces and painting the bathroom. So the bathrooms are small rooms relative to the rest and easy to have fun. And sort of true to my approach to making things, it was too much bother to cut the tile to size, and so I made the bathroom to fit the tile. So since there's nothing there, the tile got laid out on the floor, and then the walls were brought up to the tile. So that's what size the bathroom was. And the tiles are Italian, fake Mexican terracotta. Okay, and some of them had dried out in a field, and I guess dogs or coyotes had walked across them, so they had footprints in them. They were in the reject section, but that was exactly what I wanted. I like having the dog prints in it. So because it's porous in that way, it will receive dye. What you're seeing me doing here is laying the tile out on the floor. I have my stencil carved of the water nymphs, and you'll see they're the same figures that you saw earlier around the top of the wall. I'm applying rice paste resist, which is made from rice and bran. So this is very much Katazome. It's just not on silk. It happens to be on tile. I'm pushing the paste through the stencil and then removing the stencil. Once the paste is dry, I set about using the natural pigments and soy milk to bind it to the floor. You can see this is the drain where the tub will go. And because I prefer a Japanese style bathtub, in which the water overflows onto the floor, I have a floor drain also prepared. Okay, so once the colors are applied, one by one, allowed to dry, and then finally washed off. And of course, all of that rice paste can be washed right down the drain. There's nothing toxic. It's all water-based. And that's the floor of the bathroom. So this is one approach that I took in creating the bathroom. And that same stencil, the same dye work, can be seen in this garment on the left. This was from an exhibition in Japan. And this is yet another version of it. And as you saw earlier, that's also the same stencil that was used in the garment in back of me in the lecture today. This is still the same floor. The floor itself is maybe 100, 120 feet long by about maybe 50 feet wide, just to give you a notion. This is the fireplace that heats the building. Remember, this was completely empty when I began. You see the stove that we use for the dyeing and the refrigerator and some of the various dyes and so forth. Okay, moving over a little bit to the right of the stove, this is the map drawer that I built into the facility, and it contains all of the various stencils. There are several thousand. I was trained in Japan for this. I went when I was 17 and apprenticed to a Bingata style dyer. Bingata is Okinawan style katazome. And when she passed away, I inherited all of my teacher stencils as well as all of her teacher stencils. And as I was the youngest student of everybody, so as the older classmates of mine have passed away, they send me all of their equipment and stencils and so forth from Japan. And I purchase a few. And of course, I've carved several thousand myself. So all of those are contained within these map drawers. The nice thing about Katazome is the stencils don't take up any room. If you're doing silk screening and you need a frame, if you have 30 frames, that's a lot of storage space. If you have 30 Japanese stencils, it's not even a sock drawer. It takes up the thickness of a sheet of paper. So that is one of the big pluses of this process. Going into the map drawer and pulling out one, you see this stencil of cow eyes. I do teach classes locally as well as around and about. In doing children's classes, which I especially enjoy, I get a lot of rancher kids. I had a group of about 12-year-old boys from the ranches around here, and I give them a challenge, as I do all my students. So they were allowed to give me a challenge to tell me a theme, and they wanted cow eyes. Okay, that was what they wanted their pattern to be. So here you can see I've drawn the eyes of the cows with the cows themselves interspersed, and that's our repeating pattern. The patterns, of course, don't have to be Japanese by a long shot. This is another challenge that a student group gave me. When I give a challenge, what I'll say, so we've covered how to make stencils. You understand the theory by this point in the class, and I'll say to each of you, okay, why don't you draw a stencil for me that includes a fork and a UFO and a railroad. Okay, a locomotive. If you understand the stenciling patterning process, we're not talking pretty here. It doesn't have to be pretty. I just want to see if you understand how to combine patterns in a repeating pattern, regardless what the motif is. Okay, so that's your challenge. So out of fairness, you get to give me a challenge. And the challenge to me in this case was fish, calligraphy, and trees. What kind of pattern could I make using those three themes? Well, starting with the tree was the easiest. And then I took the fish and created a spiral to have the different branches of the tree. And then you can see that the trunk itself is textured with the word that says fish, 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 fish. And so I covered all three categories. And actually, I kind of like it. Okay, I'm happy with this piece. So now I'm going to take it and dye it. I have my stencil done. I'm going to create sort of a Persian feeling, at least in my mind. So the first thing I've done is created a blank arch. I have rice paste in the background with a pattern of undulating lines and rabbits. And then I'm laying that same stencil you just saw a moment ago on top of the fabric. The fabric is silk with gold, 24 karat gold shot through it, laminated to a piece of paper to give it stiffness. This is not going to be a garment, it's going to be a wall hanging, and therefore the paper backing. So as you can see, the paste is here. You can see it in these little islands of yellow. I'm applying my colors over it just as I did on the bathroom tile. And then once all the colors are applied, as you see here, I let it cure. I hang it up to air. That's what curing means, is just letting the protein oxidize. And then once it's washed out in that bathtub you saw earlier, okay, this is the finished piece. So you can see the piece in its entirety to the left, the details of how those colors relate to the fish, and then a little bit larger version of it on the right. And the sparkling, the star-like twinkle is that gold that's catching the light of the camera light. Okay. Okay, so then continuing on with the rest of it. So here are the map drawers. We're going around to yet another bathroom in the studio, since we're usually quite a few people attending.
John, is this
So
a
this
good
gives,
moment for questions? Is it just the three
oh
questions
yes, please go ahead.
relevant from what you just shared? The first one is,
Yes,
did you have to seal the tile afterwards with anything when you did the
yes.
bathroom floor?
Yes, you seal the tile with a regular tile sealer because it would remain porous otherwise, right? And so because the pigment dye that I used is also porous, it's going to react exactly the same way the terracotta does. So the entire thing gets sealed at once. And then, as you should do with any porous tile that gets a lot of use, you have to reseal it every few years or so. Okay. Any next question?
Do you hand cut the stencils or laser cut?
I only hand cut because I like hand cutting. I like the stencil cutting itself. To me, is a very satisfying art form. I know that many of the students that I've taught over the years find that they actually prefer cutting the stencils over anything else, and they won't even do the dyeing. They'll just cut these beautiful images from the paper and sometimes create sculptures out of those. You can cut them with laser. If you're going to do that, there are many types of paper that may be used. There's the traditional handmade paper, which is what I prefer to use in my carving, but there are modern synthetic versions that also work. You are, of course, limited to the size of your laser cutter, whereas when cutting by hand, the stencil can be as large as you can physically handle. Okay, next question.
Thank you. And there's one more question, which is you've kind of already answered, but what are you cutting the stencils into?
Oh, what is the stencil made of? It's the traditional stencil paper is handmade mulberry paper that's been layered many layers, lacquered with persimmon tannin. The persimmon tannin is dried and then it's smoked to cure it. And then it's set aside for a year to finish curing before it's made available for sale. That's traditional. There are two other kinds of contemporary. One is completely synthetic, plasticky kind of material, and the other one is in between the two. The traditional one is long fiber Japanese handmade paper, washi. The in-between one is using what's called Western style paper. That means short fiber with the same persimmon tannin. So it's not as high quality as the first, but it's a little bit better than the synthetic. Okay, so those are the three ranges commercially available nowadays. I do sell a lot of these things off my website, but for folks overseas, that's not commercially viable. So it is hard. In the States, it's easy to get most of these supplies, in Canada as well. But when you're in Europe, it's a little bit harder to get many of these supplies. I ship overseas, but more importantly, during the class itself, I help you to find substitutes that work well so that you can continue the process without necessarily being dependent upon me or any foreign source for it. That way you can use local materials. Okay, that's a big part of my classes. And so this bathroom I wanted to show you, I don't have a bathroom fixation. It's just that since they are small rooms, they're easier to have fun with than a massive room. In this case, I've used teak carvings from Thailand for the ceiling as an overhead light. You can see the sconces here, and then I have various carvings, Japanese style toilet. And what was fun here in treating the floor, this is all cement, and the cement panels that are up are wave patterns that carry up like wainscoting along the side. Everything is very eclectic, hodgepodge of things I've collected over the years. Sideboard, you see more of the equipment we use as we're making our turnaround. There's some African velvet at the top out of thistle, some of the various carvings and so forth. I like to have the various textures and carvings around. They always serve as inspiration, of course. This is a wonderful Canadian artist that does the work. I collect lions, and so you'll see those scattered all over the place. Lions, I mean big cats, so whether they're leopards or tigers or jaguars. Okay, and to the right here is another loft space where I do my stencil carving. I collect Japanese stencils as well. This is some very exquisite examples we use in the classes. There are little private parts when people are taking classes. They're little cubby holes. They can get away to have a little privacy. And here again, a map drawer. This is where I sit to carve my stencils. This is a huge light table. And carving those stencils, here again is that handmade mulberry paper that's been lacquered. You can see I'm cutting out the wisteria shapes. There is a traditional Japanese blade that's used that's actually fairly expensive, and you have to be gentle with it or it snaps and then you have to go back and sharpen it. So again, the local material I recommend is simply an X-Acto knife with a number 11 blade. It works just as well. It actually works better because you can change the blades often and keep them sharp, and you get much cleaner, crisper images. In carving this stencil, this is the net result. This is using 2 different layers of stencils, and it's of the Golden Gate Bridge with Coit Tower in the background. Okay, this is in the collection of the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco. Okay, so we're back to that shot of me working in my studio. So now downstairs, I think you have a little bit better idea of the layout of things. If we stop and look at the rafters now, so the camera has been pointed up. Again, these are 16-foot rafters. And so I have plenty of room to hang my fabric down to cure. And I've mentioned curing in several different contexts, both with the paper as well as the fabric. I use a soy base for almost everything, just soy milk, okay, from beans and water. But that's a protein. It's a protein polymer. And it's important that once the protein is dry, that you also allow it to cure, which is different than drying. Drying means the moisture has evaporated. Curing means that the protein is oxidizing and becoming non-water soluble. Because it's now non-water soluble, it's permanent on your cloth. So that's what these are doing. They're just hanging around up there out of the way, thinking about the next step they're going to be exposed to. I prepare a lot of publications. I like writing, I like teaching, I like sharing. But what I really like to do with the books is to have real samples in them whenever possible. In creating a collector's guide of Japanese indigo, it has all the different types of ways in all the different types of fabrics, textiles, weaving techniques that in which the Japanese employ indigo, all these different weaves and things. In this larger collection, I've presented mounted samples of each of those. If it's a shibori technique with indigo, then you have a shibori sample. If it's a katazome, then you have that, a weaving sample, silk, cotton, all the different ways in which that's used. So in this case, what I'm showing you are those rods I pointed out just a moment ago, and you can see this black pipe here. The cotton fabric called sarashi has been sewn into a loop, and I'm turning it sort of like a vertical conveyor belt. And at the very bottom here, what it's doing, it's going into an indigo pot. And so as I roll this around and bring it down, it becomes dyed. I roll it up, it comes down, and I'm preparing my colors. And the final result is this warrior on the left. And that's the sample that goes into this collection. Okay, here's another use of that same system up above. Again, the indigo pot is at the bottom. You can see the stitching line, which makes this silk bolt into a loop. And as I pull it up, it goes through the indigo liquid, it oxidizes, goes all the way up and back down again, ready for the second layer of silk and up. Normally, I don't do that. I stretch out sideways, as I mentioned. But in this case, I'm doing production work. This was for the cover of an indigo book. It was a limited edition of 100 copies. And so in order to do that kind of production work, it made sense to invent that kind of pulley system, basically. So the cover of the book are the shades of indigo from my backyard. The Chinese character says ai, which means indigo, and there's a sprig of the indigo plant, Persicaria. And because it has pink flowers normally, I put just a touch of soy milk and iron rust to give it the pink, okay? And then, of course, the finished book you see on the right. The cover and the image you see on the left, the cover is here, and those images being dyed on the fabric appear in the center of the book. And then, of course, the book itself had all sorts of samples of the different shades of indigo. And again, fabric, the same fabric for that book, curing up in the rafters. Some of the paste is drying at that point before it was dipped in the pot. Okay, so going back down now, we're going to, that's how the studio is used, the inside. We're going to go outside. through those doors into the deck area. So this is an enclosure outside. Okay, so you see there are Benin bronze sculptures and things of that nature out in the garden. And here are samples of the indigo from the garden, dried and not dried. This piece is something actually Cheryl helped me with. Again, I'm sorry I keep picking on you, Cheryl, but this was done with a plasma torch at her ranch in Washington State. And the same shot in the autumn when the wisteria has changed colors. This is sort of a travel guide, I guess, and the same thing in spring. This is the deck that nothing goes to waste. So the deck also is a place we can work outside and stretch. This is a massive sink for washing things. If we go back through this section, we'll go to the boiler room, which powered the entire mill. And then these are some of the silk scarves that have been dyed from the garden airing. So again, they're dyed with the fresh leaf indigo. A shot from above. This would be the pot that I use for my indigo outside. These are huge soy sauce containers. Soy sauce was brought to, manufactured in China, used in China. When the pot is empty, it's basically scrap. And so it would be used as ballast when ships would come to the US and dumped here before the ship turned around loaded with American cargo going back to China. So I was able to get hold of these huge clay pots for my indigo vats. And I should mention these lights that you've been seeing. I was trying to figure out the lighting for the studio. And of course, it would be easy to go to a discount hardware store and pick up things, but they wouldn't have looked right. So I was able to purchase those in Bali and bring them back. And the interesting thing about those is they're not reproduction. In Bali, they still use the kerosene lamps, and they've never stopped manufacturing the Victorian style lamp. So I did have to electrify them, but otherwise those are the lamps I'm using throughout the building. And the cats themselves are also from Bali. I've used them as the newels and so forth, the posts in my various staircases and things. There's a longer story behind them that I'll save for another time. I collect the large cats. This is this is a Japanese lion dance head. This one is from Jogja in Indonesia. Again, lion dance head. Okay, and this is one from Timur, lion dance head, Indonesia. This one is from India. Again, a lion dance head. The head used in the lion dancing. Okay, this is yet another one. I've forgotten which island that was from at the moment. And then another Japanese one. And this one is Mexican. Okay, so the Mexicans also have the large jaguar heads. What these are doing up high, they're way up in the ceiling. They're hiding the outlet boxes. Okay, so that's what they're up above doing. So back to the boiler room. This is the boiler itself. It was stacked with wood. Steam was generated. That's what churned this huge locomotive-looking engine that turned all the wheels that carried the grains up and ground them and so forth. And what you see hanging from the rafters is some of the indigo from the garden as I'm preparing the seeds for next year's planting. And the yard itself can be daunting. I'm busy. I get easily distracted doing other things. So sometimes I let the lawn go a little bit too long before cutting it. But this is what the outside garden looks like. Okay. There are 150, 200-year-old black walnut trees in the garden. Okay. The yard was completely bare. So everything you see, all of the decks, all of the constructions, everything, the trees planting are things that I've done. I'll pick on Cheryl again. She helped me do a great deal of that. Wisteria arbor surrounds the town bandstand where our festivals are held. And so here are some of the tarps that are up in anticipation of the Blackberry Festival. The Blackberry Festival is held the third weekend of every August. We just celebrated our 40th year. It also is cold in Covelo. We are in the mountains at about 2,000 feet, and we can get quite a bit of snow and quite hot in the summer as well. Okay, this gives you another shot in the dead of winter. Oops, that's a duplicate. Sorry about that. So we're back. Oh, that's what it was. I wanted to take you back. We're back inside the mill. This is the old hand-dug well that was used to power the mill with our little bucket. And this is a Japanese wheel and a Japanese bucket, but nonetheless, it is the Old West type hand-dug well. The bricks were made locally. You can just absolutely look down in there. Things do get dropped in from time to time. So that's what this is, if you can see that on your screen. This looks like a bear trap. And when you drop it down inside, the claw opens up. And when you release it, it will grab hold of whatever you dropped in the well and allow you to pull it out. It doesn't work well on cats and things, but inanimate objects is great. Okay, so we're going back out into the garden in the backyard now. The Japanese Persicaria tinctoria growing in the backyard, along with some hydrangeas in the front here. And you can see the black walnut tree in the background. Okay, and I also have Asian pears, apples, blood peaches. There are a wide range of fruit trees growing in the backyard. I especially prize my tree peonies. I've always loved tree peonies, and you'll see I use them in my artwork as well. Okay, so this is an overall shot of the back. And the circle is showing you that same batch of Japanese indigo growing in the backyard. This picture is actually from a class that I just finished, where we were focusing on making different colors from Persicaria. A lot of people think of indigo as being one plant. It's not. It's many, many different kinds of plants that produce blue. And many of these plants also produce other colors. So the Japanese Persicaria tinctoria, of course, creates a beautiful robin's egg blue, peacock blue, navy blue, all those shades, but it also creates all of these shades of purple in the background. And it also, you're able to produce a carmine color as well as a whole range of yellows. And so the yellows with the red purples, with the blues, basically gives you the full color spectrum from this one plant. And I find it truly amazing that all of those colors can be achieved that through this single planting. Okay, and now I'm going to take you around the side of the yard to the back, to the north side, and I added another way in and out of the building. The building originally just had the front door as the only way of getting in and out, which is not really safe. So that back deck and balcony was added to the back, and now on the north side, I'm adding yet another construction. So a friend and I did all of the construction work that you're seeing here. Okay, sometimes a bit precarious. Okay, and that's the finished staircase. Still in the painting mode. Going back inside, picking on Cheryl again. This is a piece that Cheryl did using indigo and the rice paste resist. It's a combination of katazome plus another creative use of the paste to get the swirling. So this is where I will broadcast my various classes, my little studio setup. And then my desk for working on other publications online. Again, you see a Benin bronze of a leopard here. You see the various cats. This is a Tahitian piece, not Tahitian, Caribbean piece, another Balinese piece, some Balinese, not Balinese, Timor, from Timor armor out of copper. Anyway, just lots of doodahs all over the place. This is my homepage of my web page, and on it, what you'll see, I have online classes that I teach there. The type of programs that Flora is offering today, online classes like this, which are very convenient for most of us. I do have a sign up for my newsletter also if you're interested in being notified. And if you'll click on the sitemap icon, there'll be all sorts of articles listed about what is indigo, what's the difference between the different plants. There'll be articles about Japanese festivals, about Japanese textiles and things. If you're interested in reading those, they're just posted there. Okay. And so that's the type of thing I produce in the little office you saw. I will record out of my studio for various projects. There are different online classes of programs that are independent of me. You can order them at any time, how to do the soy milk and that type of thing. Those are on the website. And then I mentioned earlier that collection of indigo where you saw me preparing it up. This is what it looks like. When I was a kid, we used to get the, I guess you'd call them comic books. We didn't call it that. The summer educational pulp books from Japan. So these would be printed in Japanese, and also they would be filled with all sorts of treasures. They would have crossword puzzles, of course. They would have treasure maps. They would have fold-out assembly things. For those of you familiar with Cracker Jacks, it was like having Cracker Jack prizes on steroids. I mean, we got everything and all sorts of toys. They were just really entertaining. And these books were designed to keep kids thinking and educated during their summer break, if school in Japan. So we went to Japanese school as kids. And so I had these things coming in, and I loved it. I loved the tactile, the idea of having something while reading, while learning, while using your brain to hold on to smell, to feel, all of those senses being used as part of the learning experience. So the type of books that I like to produce in my studio are things that you can touch and feel and enjoy the same way. So again, this box was made by Anthony Kleisis, who's a loom maker. So he produced the books for me. And then all of these samples are Japanese pieces that I've collected and curated into this collection. So every single one of these samples in the collection is related to indigo. Indigo has been used in the dye process, and that's the purpose of this particular collection. And there are other books and things like that I do too. This is another one. This is a traveler's companion for looking at textiles, something you can keep in your pocket more or less if you're traveling, say in Japan. So this would have samples of each technique. If you're talking about shifu, then it has strands that are going to be woven. It has the paper from which the strands are spun, and it has the final woven paper. And then it has a different version of paper called kamiko, which crinkle. So the purpose of this is, again, let's say you have a collection of textiles yourself, you're traveling in Japan, you're looking for something, you can show this page to the dealer and say, do you have this? Or more importantly, when the dealer shows you something, you can go to that page and see if it's real or not. Is this really what he's saying? Does it really feel like this? Does it look like this? Did the dealer make a mistake in presenting it? These are all things you can do to confirm the textiles you have in your collection. And on this other page is an example of ra, which is one type of what the Japanese call tangled weave and falls in the general category of lino weaving in English. So again, just 2 pages to show you the type of thing in that kind of book. Again, from an educational standpoint and textiles, these are samples of naturally dyed yarns. The artist is listed on the left here, and I've mounted them so that you can see right and left. The purpose of this collection is to show you exactly the same weave arranged with different colored threads. So it's the colorways. This weave is identical to this weave, is identical to this one. They simply use other colors, and it gives you a totally different impression of the textile in the end. And because we, as weavers, we want to know what the back looks like, it's mounted so that you see the front, but when you flip it over, this circular section is cut out so you can also see the back. So this is the reverse side of the weave you see in the front. This is the approach I take in my teaching. This is the approach I take in my publications. The idea is education, understanding, and appreciation. This is a tiny sampling of some of the bolts that I pull from, the sewing mannequins and so forth. This is my sewing room. I prefer to sew on the floor like this. It's how I learn, so I'm more comfortable. Again, that's just the sewing room. Whoops. And this is I use the same machine for the last 40 years. As long as it goes forward and does backup, it's all I really need. And just more fabric storage, box after box after box of fabrics. And then some of the collecting get really fun, really exotic things. Like this particular piece is well, you can see it's a peacock feather, but the peacock feather has been shredded sideways. So the first thing you do is you take that handmade Japanese paper, the kind of paper they would make Japanese currency out of, the bills, that high quality paper that's very rugged, then has a coat of real lacquer applied, then gold leaf and various precious and semi-precious metals and dust are applied to the background to give you this background coloring. And then over the top of the precious metals, these peacock feathers were laminated and pressed so that they're glued in place. Okay, that's not all. So as soon as everything's dry, now you go and shred it into little teeny tiny strips and then go back and weave it with the silk. So this is a woven obi. This is a woven textile. Everything was shredded. What can I say? It's the Japanese doing what they do, okay? And this piece in the center here, this is woven in the same way. This is woven mother of pearl. So the background was done with platinum, as you can see, and other semi-precious metals. The mother of pearl was very, very thinly scraped, laminated, shredded, woven. Okay. And then this last piece you see in the bottom corner, that's called saga nishiki. And that's where you take this gold paper, this handmade paper, laminate it just with gold, none of the fancy peacock feathers or anything, shred it and weave with it and get these beautiful structures. So these are all the types of textiles that I enjoy collecting and sharing and teaching about. Oddball things come in my hands. Sometimes people in Japan send me things that might be awkward to pass around in Japan. So this particular collection is of Emperor Meiji. So he would be comparable to Victorian era, okay? Emperor Meiji's clothing. The dates are here telling you exactly when the collection was put together, exactly what it is. So all the provenance is there. These are all pieces that he would have worn and been part of his court in the 1880s and so. Okay, so when he died, this collection was put together. It was given to someone as what sort of a reward for having been affiliated with the court, and it was passed down. But over time, people ran out of space. They no longer have the huge palaces and things they might have had. They live in condos now. They need to discreetly dispose of it. And because all of the information is there as to who it was given to and what family it belonged to, it's embarrassing to dispose of it. So they can quietly send it off to me, and I have it in my collection now too as a learning tool. They're not the best in the world. They're not his most exquisite examples. Those are in the museums. But this is still the real thing, and it's great for learning. It's frayed at the corner. There's a little bit of a food stain on it because they were used, but that means you can pick off a couple threads to look under a microscope without damaging a national treasure. Okay? So those are the kinds of things in the studio. This is a shot of his great-great-grandson, Emperor Meiji's, who then became, is he the emperor now? I forget who's, yeah, he's the emperor now. So this was a long time back, okay, when this shot. This is when he was getting married. So this orange-colored garment is this orange-colored garment in Emperor Meiji's collection. It's not the same garment, but it's exactly the same style, with exactly the same dye techniques and the same tradition. These are the ones in my collection, but I want to show that those are still contemporary. And you can see the transparency of the weave. This is a very fine quality lino weave. By the way, while I'm thinking about it, there is something I have on YouTube that you can Google. Just Google John Marshall and then Google velvet or silk or something, and it'll come up. It's a Textile of the Month club. So once a month, about the second Tuesday, I post a topic. Okay, and one month was silk velvet, Japanese velvet. Another month was lino weave. This very last one was a type of weaving called monro. Okay, a type of lino. The one coming up will be one on natural dyes. So those are just little half-hour, hour talks about these Japanese textiles if you're interested. So that's free. It's on YouTube. In the same Emperor Meiji's period, there was a huge Western influence. So you can see the Napoleonic hat with the ostrich feathers, the 24-karat gold bullion that was used in the outfit. These are other things in the collection. This is just the Prussian influence on the Japanese government at the time. And what you saw a moment ago was the traditional Japanese. So these two existed together as they were gradually becoming more familiar with the contemporary West. Back in the same studio, this is upstairs and where Emperor Meiji's things are housed. Again, you have the various cats from Indonesia. I was raised Roman Catholic, so it kind of has that saintly look to it with the statues above, although there's no religious significance at all. But that architectural influence from a kid, I guess, just sort of comes through somehow. Okay, more studio, room after room with pocket doors. And if you'll notice those little red cabinet at the end there, okay, that's the room we're going to move into. So this has kitchen, sink, and everything for when we're doing classes upstairs. There's still bathrooms. It's easy access for snacks and that type of thing. Okay. Okay, and more bookcases. We're heading towards the 3rd floor now. There are 6 floors. I'm not going through all 6 floors of it, okay? Another bathroom in the 2nd floor there, again, with more Chinese and what is that? It's a castle. So Scottish influence, okay? As I said, very eclectic. And this is a view on the 3rd floor, which is my living space. My sister, youngest sister, Laura, did furniture for a long time. And so this is one of the sofas that she made. We call it the camel couch. And of course, my 3 cats. Then continuing up to the 4th floor, still under construction at the time the photo was taken. But you might think I have too much time on my hands, okay, because there are all these things that distract me. My main focus is the dyeing and the textiles. But, the fact of the matter is, through how I was raised and education, we were encouraged to use our brain and our hands together and our imagination and to try things. So for me, working on the mill is not a distraction. I get as much satisfaction out of doing the construction, the designing, the painting, the digging of post holes. All of that is physical, but also brain work at the same time. I actually get as much satisfaction out of that as I do out of my dye work. So they're all balanced together. One does not distract from the other. But going into the dye work a little bit more, this is an example of some of the Katazome work. This is a very large stencil. It's about 6 feet tall, the stencil is. Not something you could cut on a laser cutter under most circumstances, okay? And then you see the peonies in the background. That last piece was a commission. For those of you in the States, you might be more familiar with the history of Japanese American internment and so forth. So the Japanese American Citizens League commissioned me to do this piece as a commemorative to one of the civil rights workers that was very instrumental during that period. So those are the types of things. I do some commission work like this. And so in his case, this is the lion who is the keeper of the gate or the keeper of our civil rights in the States. And the peony is then tempered with the citizens in the background being protected and the beauty and the delicacy of our family and the delicacy and fragility of our civil rights that need to be protected. And so this was the theme chosen for his presentation. Then going off in other directions, again, traditional Japanese, that's my background, so a lot of my images are Japanesey, but I want to point out that these are all natural colors that you're seeing. And this is Katazome, but there are many, many layers of stencils used. Japanese normally use one layer, one set of stencils in their Katazome. I prefer to layer them to get more dramatic effects. So this is an example of some of the clothing that I'll produce. You can see perhaps the phoenix here is a stencil. This is cochineal with indigo and soot and 24 karat gold. Okay, and this is a shot of that youngest sister I mentioned who made the furniture. And this is a garment that I did not with stencils, but the same rice paste, freehand drawing the stencil, freehand drawing the paste rather than pushing it through a stencil. This is a rather ancient piece. It's something I made in the 1970s. And again, My models, like the first model you saw is Daphne. She's a professor at Berkeley University and Mills College. My sister, obviously, you see at hand. Donna's a neighbor and a friend of mine. I pull the models from my friends. Donna's mother is an Irish Catholic woman. She especially likes this shot of her daughter. Okay. To me, that wasn't my intention. To me, it's a little bit more of a Star Trek version of Beam Me Up, Scotty. But however you want to interpret it, you know, it's in the eye of the beholder. So then I want to go back to the fact that Flora is sponsoring this class coming up in Katazome. So everything you've seen here, all the different techniques of layering color in the class itself, we will be carving stencils, designing stencils, covering how to make the dies themselves, how to apply them, how to shade, how to cure, how to plot them into matching across seams if you're going to be doing sewing. So basically everything you've seen here will be covered. Now it is, I believe it's a 6-day program. So I'm not going to be able to give you 50 years of knowledge crammed into that, but I will certainly put as much in there. And my goal always is to have you be independent. The last thing in the world I want is the traditional Japanese system where you are an apprentice to the teacher for 20, 30, 50 years. My preference is to give you the basic knowledge. You go off on your own and you create your own artwork without being influenced by me. And so do create your own beauty, do create your own things. And here, one more time, I'm going to pick on Cheryl. But Cheryl's a good example of that because she took the knowledge and then with her own insight, her own beauty, her own creativity, she has created some absolutely amazing things. And we're both actually part of an exhibit. Cheryl's work was on the cover and is very beautifully featured, very contemporary. So if you get a chance, it's the Boise, Idaho Museum. It's up for another month or two. So if you will Google that, Katazome, with the Boise, Idaho Museum, you'll be able to see a wonderful virtual tour. You'll see some of my work, but you'll also have a chance to see some of Cheryl's, and you'll be able to see some of other Katazome artists from around the world producing things to give you a better sense of what's up there. And it is a wonderful exhibit and a contemporary exhibit. Finally, this is also the type of contemporary work I produce. This is also cone and stencil. And bottom line, I guess, is what I'm trying to produce with my work, whether it's my studio construction, whether it's the textiles, the books I produce. I've always had the luxury of just doing what I want to do and being able to support myself. It is a luxury, and I know that. But many people have tried to help me and nudge me in a direction or nudge me in another direction. And their intentions were good, but I knew it didn't feel right. And so by sticking to what my goal was for my future and being appreciative of their help, okay, I've been able to carve out a modest existence for myself and have the pleasure of waking up every single morning looking forward to the next project at hand. And as I say, support myself in the process. It's not rich, it's not famous, but when I'm dead, who cares? You know, the main thing is I've enjoyed my life and I've enjoyed the ability and the freedom to be creative in my own way. And I would also wish that for each of you. So that's the type of thing I try to encourage. In this particular garment, what we're seeing is my approach to the work. It is eclectic, but this is heavy upholstery cording, not Japanese at all. It's cut in a very simple shape. It's not intended to be a kimono or anything else along that line. What it is intended to be is something that alludes to the Japanese aesthetic as I interpret it, and you can still wear it to drive in. Okay, that's the other key. A kimono, you can't drive in a kimono. So all of my work is geared towards that. All of my work is eclectic, but all of it's me when taken together. So we'll go ahead and end the talk with that. And if you have any other questions, you're welcome to pipe in, and I'll let Flora